Here to talk to you about Black baseball history. And of course, today is September the 6th, 2025. And so we're going to talk about a little history. Thank you guys for chiming in. Covering my cold here, so I missed yesterday. So, um, I hope you guys didn't miss me too much, but uh, later on, maybe I'll go back and hit a few of those things that I did yesterday because there were some wonderful things. I do want to mention yesterday was September the 5th, and it was Larry Brown, the famous Memphis Red Sox catcher, was born on that day. And I just want to mention that I talked to his daughter-in-law quite a bit, and Larry Brown was a great catcher. You can't talk about Memphis Red Sox baseball without talking about Larry Brown. And so I unfortunately was a little bit under the weather and couldn't get on that day. So I want to make sure that I mention him today. So Larry Brown, one of the all-time greats. I know when I talk to people who played in that period when Larry Brown, talking about 1920s, right there, 1920s, 1930s, when he was certainly in his prime. They said that he was very similar to Frank Duncan of the Kansas City Monarchs in his style. And of course, they had that really tightly drawn catcher's mitt. So when a pitcher who could really bring it hit that mitt, man, it was like gunfire, rifle fire every time he hit that mitt all over the park. And Larry Brown was one of the all-time greats. And like I said, when I think about Memphis baseball, I can't let it go by without mentioning Larry Brown. Larry Brown was Memphis baseball, and there was a lot of other great players who came through the years. If you want to go back to Squire Moore and Lefty Glass and those guys of the 20s, Larry Brown was there then. Of course, he was there when Verdell Mathis and Marlon Carter, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Verdell and Marlon and also Professor Lowell, who was there. Excuse me, Professor Lowell, who was also one of the famous Memphis Red Sox players. He was on one of the teams that he actually discovered Verdell Mathis and brought him into the Negro League, but he was also responsible for getting Satchel Paige into the Negro National League because he had played down in Chattanooga. And so, Memphis, just a great history. One of these days, I'm going to really talk about Memphis and that. I did interview Larry's wife. I interviewed her back in the 80s. She was quite helpful, and she had some wonderful stories. And I put some of those in my book, The Negro Baseball Leagues of Photographic History. But believe me, there's much more that I could tell you about Larry Brown that I haven't told you yet. So, and you haven't read it because it hadn't been written. So Larry Brown, just want to mention him. I'm going to go ahead and take a sip off here. I got something warm here to keep my throat going. All right. So let's get on another birthday today of somebody that I knew pretty well. It was T.J. Young. T.J. Young was also a catcher like Larry Brown. T.J. Young was probably one of the premier hitting catchers. I know I talked to George Giles, and he said that in the 1930s, T.J. hit pitchers like Dizzy Dean like they were schoolboys. And so this guy was really a great hitter. T.J. Young, born in Alabama, and of course he died in 1964 in Seattle, Washington. Now, in his particular case, he had a brother named Maurice. Maurice, his nickname was Doolittle, and he lived in Kansas City. And when I first started, he was one of the early people that I interviewed, and I would go by his house. I do have a photograph that appears. I place it up on the line occasionally. So I knew Maurice Doolittle Young, and they were part Choctaw Indian. And they went to Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and they came out of Okmulgee, and that's where they started to merge into playing the baseball. TJ went down to Wichita, played with the Monrovians. And if you look up the Monrovians, you see they don't have a lot of information about the Monrovians online, but they do have the game they played. I think it was 1925 against the Ku Klux Klan. You can look that up. That's out there. But the Monrovians were a team based out of Wichita, Kansas. Yeah. So somebody mentioned, say you look pretty sharp. I'm wearing my, believe it or not, in Indianapolis ABC's jersey tonight. So, all right. So let's jump back in there. Okay, so TJ Young, interviewed him. I didn't interview TJ, but TJ was good friends with Chet Brewer. They were best friends. And so I was able to learn a lot about TJ from Chet and Maurice. And then also at that time, you see his sister, and his sister, well, she went by Annie, but her name was Ann Ward. She was living in Kansas City, Missouri. I interviewed her a number of times. He had a brother named Lewis. Lewis lived in Seattle. He was still alive at that time. He had another brother named Lawrence Young, who lived in St. Louis at the time. So I was able to get lots of good information on TJ. I also featured him in a baseball card set, Dixon's Negro League Baseball Greats in 1987. Of course, it has a wonderful picture of TJ in that particular set. And whenever I talk about the Kansas City Monarchs, I got to talk about TJ Young. So let's jump over and go to another one. Just excuse me, guys. I'm doing the best I can. So anyway, TJ Young was born September 6, 1902. And Larry Brown was born September 5th, 1905, just to give you that information. Okay, September 6, 1907. Let me read this fact here and then I'll give you some commentary on it. A local crowd of 1,000 fans watched a 5-2 win by the Cuban Giants over the Pittsfield, Massachusetts team. Giants pitcher Jim Abbott and Dago Davis combined for a one-hitter. Williams went 2 for 5 at bat with a double and scored a pair of runs in the win. I had to talk about Williams. Clarence Williams is somebody that should be considered for the Hall of Fame. Clarence Williams was we might say, the premier catcher of that period. And he played for a long time, started out with the Cuban Giants. He was out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They're not talking about Clarence enough, but he's playing with the Cuban Giants there. And so I like to talk about him. I think I need to do more work on him because if I don't do the work, I don't wait for other people to do the work. If I feel someone needs to get talked about, I'm going to talk about it, all right? And boy, somebody asked me, how old am I? I'll just put it this way. This is my 45th year as being a baseball historian. And I started in 1980. And I was 23 years old, 1980, where I went exclusively doing Negro League Baseball. Now, in all of my youth, I had collected baseball cards and gone to Major League games. I knew the National and American League players very well. But in 1980, that's when I began to work diligently on this history. And my goal at that time was to make sure that these men's history was never lost. And at that particular time, there were only about 3 of us out there. And Robert Peterson, who had written the book, Only the Ball Was White, but he wasn't very active. And the 2 active guys were John Hallway, and he had written a number of books. John was active, trying to write books all the way till he died here about maybe a year ago. And he was like 95. And Jim Riley. And Jim Riley was also very active. He was getting started, but at that particular time, there's only a handful of us. And so I was the only African American. And let me go back. There was another guy who had written a book named Art Rust, who was a sports reporter in New York City. He had written a book, and I didn't like the title. The name of the title was Get That Nigger Off the Field, which is a phrase uttered by Cap Anson back in the 1880s. I didn't like the title because it scared a lot of people off. But, that was his approach to getting people interested in this. My approach was to go out and do interviews and begin to tell stories of literally hundreds of players, began to spotlight them as individuals. And it didn't make a difference where they came from, small town, major cities. I just became that person. And a lot of what I did originated out of Kansas City because that's where my home was. And at that time, there was a good number of African-American baseball players that was still here, but they weren't doing much. And Buck O'Neill was here. He was working as a scout for the Cubs at that time. He was an advanced scout. He was still scouting ball players at the HBCUs. Who else was here? Of course, Maurice Doolittle-Young was here. Jesse Williams, who played for the Monarchs in 1945. Jim Lamarck was here, who played for the Kansas City Monarchs in the 40s. Connie Johnson, who played for the Baltimore Orioles, and have also played with the Kansas City Monarchs and the Toledo Crawfords. He was here. So that was my early introduction to just getting this history. But there are other wives that were still around too. So anyway, so just like I'm talking about Clarence Williams, I began to talk about other people. And I went back as far as I could, and then I came up as close as I could, right up to the last ball players who played in the Negro Leagues who went to the Major Leagues. So let me get another drink here. Excuse me for a second. This is some hot apple cider. I'm trying to keep myself going. So long story short, I am 69 years old. Just turned 69, and I've got 45 years in here. So, hey, I'm still touring, out there still touring. I will be in North Carolina in about a week, and then I'm going to be also in Cleveland in about 2 weeks. So I'm still out there. I'm a co-founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, and I am still active. So I don't mind you asking that question. I'm proud of it, and like I say, I got great health, and hey, I can't complain. All right, let's go to get a couple more. I'm going to try to get through these real quick. September 6, 1911, in a game played at Muskogee, Oklahoma's athletic field, the Kansas City, Kansas Giants downed the Muskogee White Sox by 8-7 score behind the pitching of Andrew Skinner, who tossed the first 8 innings. And of course, D. Williams, Eddie Milner, Topeka Jack Johnson, Oscar Moss, and that bunch were part of the Kansas City players. Interesting thing about Kansas City, Kansas, born in Kansas, and that was one of the first team that I began to interview because one of their teammates was still living. So a guy that had played for them in 1911 and 1912. So I was able to learn about all these people through this guy. D. Williams, very interesting story. Eddie Milner, another guy, he left and he ended up passing away in Colorado. D. Williams was shot at a movie theater in Kansas City. Topeka Jack Johnson, he was also a prize fighter. And he fought the other Jack Johnson that everybody knows, fought him in Leavenworth, Kansas, 1921. Oscar Moss was a great infielder, and he was still around Kansas City. You can find him late in the 1940s, and he used to sell, there used to be a thing called Watkins products. I don't know if you remember these Watkins products, but he used to sell those and little things, teas and stuff like that on the streets of Kansas City. So Oscar Moss, his family was still around. So I was able to get a lot on this particular team, and that was part of the Kansas City, Kansas Giants. Now, if you go to the Muskogee newspaper, I think, let's see, I don't know if I wrote the name of it down. Yeah, the Muskogee Times-Democrat had some of the most racist coverage you would ever want to read whenever teams came to Muskogee to play. It was the most disrespectful coverage you ever want to see. So you can go look it up. It was the Muskogee Times-Democrat. Go look at stuff pre-1915, and you will be shocked at what you read. And so, anyway, just know there's some great ball players came there, and Muskogee was an interesting place. I know Frank Wickware before he ended up going to the Texas League. He played for Muskogee, and I think later on Muskogee had people like New Joseph, who played third base for the Kansas City Monarchs. He was from Muskogee. I would tell you one thing. There's a famous musician. His name is Jay McShann, and Jay McShann was from Muskogee, and McShann came to Kansas City. Trying to get his music career started. And when I interviewed Jay McShann, now Jay McShann is also the person who gave Charlie Parker his start in music. But McShann told me that when he left Muskogee, came to Kansas City, his mother said, you be sure to look up New Joseph. And New Joseph was the third baseman for the Kansas City Monarchs from Muskogee. So they all knew each other. And they kept in touch with each other and they helped each other. So, yeah, Jay McShann gave me that story himself. I don't know if I mentioned that in a book or not. Anyway, true story. So that is Muskogee, Oklahoma. A great place, and a great place for African American baseball history. So I've been there and presented, of course. Never presented in Okmulgee where T.J. Young was appearing, and I've never actually presented in Massachusetts either. I take that back. I did something for the Red Sox in Boston, maybe about 1994, but I'm overdue for a return there. Okay, so let's go to my last one. It's September 6, 1923. Cannonball Dick Redding hit a pair of home runs, one in the 8th and another in the 10th, to lead the Brooklyn Royal Giants to a 4-2 10-inning win over Hilldale Derby Daisies. Redding simultaneously, he's a pitcher now, tossed a 9-hitter and practically won his own game. So can you imagine that? The guy hits 2 home runs in the game, and he's pitching, and he wins his own game. I like to talk about Dick Redding a lot. And the reason for that is Dick Redding should be in Cooperstown. I could, if I had a microphone, I could drop it right now, because that's the end of the statement. He should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's not. So we will continue to talk about Dick Redding on a regular basis right here until somebody begins to take notice and they give this man his just due. So on this particular day, the guy hits 2 home runs. So he's a great hitter. And then he goes and wins the game pitching. Now, we talk about Shani Otani and even in the Negro Leagues, you talk about Martin Diego and you talk about Bullet Rogan. They were all great. But believe me, Rogan's in the Hall of Fame, Diego's in the Hall of Fame, Shani Otani is headed there. And of course, Babe Ruth was another person who could pitch and who could also hit. But what about Dick Redding? 2 guys that I think that are getting short-changed on the Hall of Fame argument are going to be Dick Redding, Dick Cannonball Redding, and John Donaldson. Those are 2 pitchers. Now, I could go a lot of other positions, but those are 2 guys that are as good as any guys who are already in the Hall of Fame, black or white. And Cannonball Dick Redding, I gave some statistics on him a couple of days ago, some of the great things he did. So, you might say, you're really opinionated. And of course, I am opinionated because I've done the work for 40 years. I compared them against the ball players from the National and American League. And because I've done the work, I can make these claims. And it's not anything, I'm not trying to puff anybody up or anything like that. I'm trying to state some facts. And in some of my books, like I'm doing a reprint of the 1905 Philadelphia Giants. And of course, another guy there, a left-hander named Dan McClellan, and who I think should have a shot at the Hall of Fame as well. And I'm not talking about no state Hall of Fame. I'm talking about the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And I hope that I live long enough to see more of these guys get the recognition they deserve. However, in the book, I compare McClellan to, I'm trying to think which player. It was one of the pitchers that was in the major leagues at that time, and I'm trying to think which one is another lefty. But I compare him, and what's interesting, they put a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame what do I want to say? And it was with the thoughts, let me put it this way. It was with the thoughts that you would never find a person like me who was willing to dig through all of the information and tell their story in that way. And so, in other words, there are ball players who now I am able to find information to prove they were better than the guys that you put in the Hall of Fame in the 1930s and the 40s and the 50s, especially from the old timers at the turn of the century. Like I say, it's real opinionated, but I back it with fact. One of my books here, this is the last one that I've written. I've written about 10 books, but this is the last one, and it was called Phil Dixon's American Baseball Chronicles, the 1910 Chicago Leland Giants. You can get that. But the thing that I did in there, I compared Pete Hill to Ty Cobb on a one-on-one basis in a way that no one ever has before. Also, I compared the Chicago Leland Giants outfield of 1910 to the Chicago White Sox outfield of 1910. And I can tell you that the Chicago White Sox, even though they were in the American League, they had a minor league outfield. And the best outfield in Chicago wasn't on the Cubs, it wasn't on the White Sox, it was on the Chicago Leland Giants. It was Pete Hill, Frank Duncan, and Andrew Payne. And I proved that in the book. And I always like to tell the story. This book has 450 pages that covers one season. And I'm looking at a book here over here. I won't pick it up and show you what it is. But it's talking about one of the players on the team. And it talks about his entire lifetime. And he played for over 20 years. And he has 200 pages. So what did I know? What did I say in 400 pages in one season that this guy who wrote this book couldn't say in 200 pages for his whole entire career? It's obvious I know something somebody doesn't, and I deliver it in a way that other people don't. So that's a little bit, and that's my take on today. I'm going to close it right here. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be feeling better. I'll get some more of this hot stuff here. Let me get a drink right now. And I'll be back and go from there. I do want to thank everybody who's taken their time to join. If you like what I'm doing here, if you like this kind of commentary, go ahead and subscribe and hit like and share it to somebody. If you got a friend who really likes baseball, who likes history, who likes to go out and do interviews, and I not only did I go interview the people, I went to cemeteries, I interviewed wives, I interviewed children. I did a lot of interviews. So now you have guys who they call themselves historians, and they sit in front of the computer all day, never go out and interview anybody, and people consider them experts. I see it all the time. But when you have a real expert, you got to listen, guys, because to be a really good historian, you just can't sit behind this computer. You've got to get out there in those streets. What they say in the military term, you got to put some boots on the ground. And I put lots of boots on the ground for 45 years and still doing it. And have great stories of people I met along the way, people who touched my life and I touched their lives. And hopefully I'm touching your life today. So thank you for coming on. And I apologize because I kind of struggled through this sniffling and continue getting a drink here. But I certainly appreciate that. And look, there's a guy named Luke on here. Thank you, Luke. You got lots of comments. So hopefully you'll come back. And I don't mind you asking my age because I'm proud of it and still healthy and still out here. So hopefully I can be out here another 15, 20 years. Okay, thank you guys. You have a nice day. And this is Phil Dixon. I go by Phil S. Dixon. You can follow me all over social media, Facebook, Instagram, and of course, right here on YouTube as well. And thank you. And I look forward to coming back and doing this again, hopefully feeling a lot better. Thank you.